Get started. Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Malvern Books. Thank you so much for joining us for a great afternoon of poetry. We're excited about that. We're going to start off with Elizabeth Raby. And Elizabeth is the author of a four-generation memoir in prose and poetry, Ransom Voices. That's from Red Mountain Press. It was published just last year. She's also the author of 3 full-length poetry collections, including This Woman, which was a finalist for the 2013 New Mexico-Arizona Book Award, and numerous chapbooks. She has received the Elmer Kelton Award for Poetry from Angelo State University in 2010, and she's a poet. She was a poet in the schools for New Jersey and Pennsylvania Arts Council, and she currently resides in New Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
Wonderful to see new friends and old here. People that I just met over the weekend and ones that I've known for several years. Feel like Texas is a second home.
Yes.
Going back from a writers' conference here, we got caught in a terrible snowstorm in New Mexico, and so that's the first poem I'll read. At the truck stop. The motel parking lot's few tall lights blur as icy blasts of snow fly sideways. Wind rattles the window glass. Through it, I can just see a brown ball of a dog curled up against meager shelter, a little island of ornamental shrubs. Below me, streaks of light as a door opens, closes, on men seeking beds, hot coffee, respite from this sudden vicious storm. I pretend to myself that the dog's owner will come out soon, feed it, put it in his truck for the night. But in the morning, I see it, a snow-covered lump. It rises miraculous, yawns, shakes matted ice from its short brown fur, turns stiffly on its 3 legs, sinks down, unfathomable in its hopeless patience. Were I the dog, I would bite the leg of every insensibility, especially that of the woman, me, standing useless at my window. And then I will read from Ransom Voices, the memoir, and I'll start with poems, 2 dying parents and a young child. Okay. Mother. Father had done the best he could do, put up a card table in the guest room beside her bed, leased a telephone for 30 days, and put it there for her. But the room looked sparse, temporary, and she a stranger to it. She's not eating, he told me. She hardly sleeps. He was bewildered that after all these years, she should want to sleep alone. I went to work. Every meal, I set the tray with her polished silver, roses in the white jade vase, crisp embroidered napkins from the camphorwood chest. She ate perfect poached eggs, salmon mousse, sugar cookies, the edges an even brown, applesauce made with the skins but milled smooth. She could pretend I was what she wanted. I knew all her recipes for a graceful life. For a few days, they eased us both. And my father died afterwards. Okay. The stone. This stone in my hand is oblong with white streaks, a marbling of fat and meat, lamb perhaps, because one side is rough, opaque as the fell left on the lamb after the wool is stripped away. The color is not the color of meat, but of milk and butterscotch, or of the graham crackers drizzled with honey and milk my father ate at night in the kitchen in Vermont, sitting alone at the white table, or of the apricot jam he bought in Beirut by the 5-pound jar to spread on fine-textured French bread. The texture of the stone is like nothing living, hard, cool, clear to the depths on two sides, reassuring, something to roll in the hand, like one from the string of worry beads he bought and carried behind him. He, a tall Swede with hairy knuckles and strong hands, turning the smooth stones as he walked daily through the souks, a beret over his fine, straight hair. His eyes, behind receding spirals of gold-rimmed glasses above his incurving beak of a nose, full of questions and delight. Beirut was still Paris of the Middle East then, a zesty stew pot of lamb and thyme simmering on cedar logs brought down from the mountains. It was still years until my father's stomach sealed itself and he starved without complaint in a quiet bedroom, only able to cast out strings of yellow mucus into the white enamel pot brought down from the attic. His beautiful massive bones, elegant against the white sheets, gradually superseding the daily starbursts of blue and purple veins, the yellow flesh, superfluous, shining, hard. And one for my daughter who's here. Sarah, you are such an easy baby. Sleep through the night, nurse 3 times a day. I am charmed by your milky snuffles and grunts, the clutch of your fist around my fingers. In the little sunroom, windows all around, I rock you in my arms, feel the speedy beat of your heart, while sheer white curtains stir in summer wind. For those days, we are content, dreaming in a world of blue toile, filmy light. And then, for something really different, I was a scholarship kid who went to Vassar from, Hicksville, Vermont. So, Vassar Virgins, Poughkeepsie, New York, 1959, 1962. Sadly, technically speaking, I was one, more or less, on April 4th, 1962, when President Sarah Gibson Blanding gave her famous speech. No one knew why we had been abruptly summoned to the chapel for this unusual all-school compulsory evening gathering. After a brief announcement and explanation of the need to increase fees for the following year, Miss Blanding, her hair in its usual bun and her saddle shoes firm on her feet, surprised us. She launched into a stern denunciation of premarital sex and excessive drinking. She told us neither would be tolerated at Vassar. Disciplinary action would be taken against those who could not follow the innate standards of the college. We sat in embarrassed astonishment as Miss Blanding declared that promiscuity was indecent and immoral. She advised those students who could not follow the rules to withdraw voluntarily from the school before they were asked to leave. Virginity and temperance were required of Vassar students. I wondered how they would know for sure who had broken the code. Would we be summoned to the warden's office to swear that we were neither wanton nor drunks? If we were already indecent or immoral, how could they rely on us to adhere to Vassar's honor system? Were we all to have a mandatory gynecological exam? What a horror to spread our legs before the infirmary doctors and nurses. We had already endured one unbelievable breach of privacy, the posture pictures, which were mandatory for every incoming freshman. One at a time, stripped naked, we had been made to enter an empty room where a voice directed us to stand just so, to turn to the right, to the left, while someone took photographs of us. Mercifully, we couldn't see the photographer, but shivering and humiliated, we wondered who was on the other side of the camera. How many people would look at these pictures? Where were they kept? We were told, of course, that they would be handled with discretion. But what did that mean exactly? The purpose of these pictures, supposedly, was to determine any faults of posture, which could then be addressed and corrected in an amazing course called Freshman Fundamentals. In Fundies, as the course was dubbed by its unwilling participants, we were taught how to sit gracefully, stand elegantly, walk fluidly, and most important of all, how to lift a suitcase correctly onto the luggage rack of a train. We strove, of course, for perfect posture in each movement. One of my hallmates, her small frame muscled and taut from prep school softball, was assigned, much to her disgust, to remedial fundamentals. When it was determined her hamstrings were too tight. In remedial fundamentals, learning to keep one's knees together and ankles crossed while seated was supplemented by additional hours of stretching and flexing. But what had caused the president's sudden outrage? Had she discovered someone in flagrante delicto? Did she really expect seniors with less than 2 months until graduation to confess and leave without a diploma? As far as I could remember, our handbooks had not said Vassar was for virgins only. As incoming freshmen, we had learned from the sophomores and juniors in our dormitories that a man's jacket hanging on a closed door meant do not knock, do not enter, do not ask what is happening in this room. As long as the door was closed, fornication apparently wasn't anyone's business except the participants. It didn't seem fair for the president to be stating an anti-fornication policy retroactively. When we were freshmen, the warden had told us in an orientation lecture that Vassar considered the custom of going off on weekends to men's schools a valid part of student life. These weekends were more or less unsupervised fraternity debauches. Had the college really been unaware of what was going on, both on campus and off? Lord knows there were plenty of unpleasant possible consequences that carried their own grim punishments. The fear of pregnancy and venereal disease was sufficient to frighten many of us into some sort of self-restraint. Religious conviction prevented others from going all the way. Nothing, however, was sufficient to keep all of us from the pleasures, mysteries, and misadventures of sex. And what about excessive drinking? Alcohol was not allowed on campus or in the dormitories. Those rules were pretty well respected. We did our drinking off campus. Legally, since 18 years was the legal age for drinking in New York State at the time. I had watched a very drunken girl throw up all over her house father's shoes once. As freshmen, a group of us, having consumed the Gallo port we carried in our wineskins, a most sophisticated accoutrement, went swimming in our underwear in the drainage creek behind the faculty apartments. Sophomore year, the handbook added the creek to the territory to be kept alcohol-free. But surely, I thought guiltily, that freshman indiscretion could not be the cause of this chastisement. Excessive drinking was harder to conceal than lack of virginity. Looking around, I really couldn't tell who was a virgin and who was not, whereas a drunk would have been detectable by the smell, if by nothing else. Of course, for the most part, we knew such facts about one another. We knew who returned hungover from weekends, most of us, if truth be told. We knew who had succumbed to the importunings of a fiancé with much misgivings and subsequent guilt. We knew who hung out at the towny bars and gaily rode away on motorcycles, clinging to the back of a t-shirted stranger. We suffered pangs of jealousy at the pretty and willing among us who went off with a Kingston trio after its on-campus concert. We knew, or suspected we knew, those who had had abortions. We knew, more or less, who was spared the temptations of sex with a man by preference for sex with a woman. Was sex with a woman premarital sex? Not then. Was it promiscuity? Until Miss Blanding's lecture, we had considered our behavior to be a private matter of conscience or appetite or hope or despair. The aftermath of the speech was really rather unpleasant, pitting the unfallen against the fallen, the good against the wicked in bitter argument. A college poll of 1,040 students out of a total student population of 1,450 concluded that 52% of us agreed with Miss Blanding that we should be pure and temperate. 40% of us disagreed. The rest were undecided. We were further embarrassed by prurient reporters asking impertinent personal questions. Most of us scuttled to classes trying to avoid them, but every major newspaper and magazine wrote stories about us and about our reaction to Miss Blanding's surprise. Apparently, Miss Blanding's speech was more of a cri de coeur, a last blast from a fading moral position, than an actual statement of policy. As far as I know, no moral delinquents were drummed out of school. None of us was summoned to an inquisition. I'm quite sure future handbooks did not state virginity as a necessary condition for admission. Within 2 years, Miss Blanding had retired. The social revolution of the late 60s and early 70s rendered her speech quaint, dear, and irrelevant. Soon after Miss Blanding left Vassar, the student movement dismantled the concept of in loco parentis. Then Vassar and its dormitories became co-ed. For a few gaudy years, until some sort of balance was restored, I've heard that many young women felt like prey in a hunting preserve. In 1962, drugs had still been a rumor. We had heard of marijuana, but only a tiny minority, the truly rebellious, had tried it. I don't know how any young woman negotiates the pressures of freedom these days. I had enough trouble making my way in my own less complicated era. From what I read, hooking up is unproblematic to the majority. It would terrify me.